Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more history matters. This time, the Crimean War, a short animated documentary. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you join the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. I am curious how they're going to fit this one into 4 minutes. I say that every fucking time, and every time they do it, but, you know, it amazes me each and every time. Let's go ahead and dive right in.
1853 and the Ottoman Empire has declared war on the Russian Empire.
Yes.
Why? Well, there's lots of reasons, but the most immediate was that the Russian Emperor Nicholas I was legally the protector of Christians within the Ottoman Empire. Napoleon III, the Emperor of the French, wanted this position, and the Ottomans caved and gave it to him. This was unacceptable, and so Nicholas sent his armies into the Ottomans' Danubian principalities, nominally to protect the Christians of the empire. This led to the Ottoman Sultan Abdulmajid I declaring war on the Russians. For the great powers of Europe, the war wasn't something they wanted. The British didn't want the Ottomans to lose and for Russia to gain too much. The French were basically looking to throw off the memories of the Napoleonic Wars by increasing their international prestige. As for the Austrian Empire, they were on good terms with the Russians, since the Russians had aided them by putting down the Hungarian Revolution of 1848. However, Austria was concerned with Russia's growing influence in the Balkans, especially its links to the Slavic and Orthodox populations there. Prussia simply opted for neutrality, so the Russians quickly won a naval
Good job, Prussia.
victory at the Battle of Sinop, sinking the Ottoman fleet there, but after that action was sparse. By 1854, Britain and France were concerned that the Russians would be victorious, and so gave them an ultimatum: withdraw your forces or risk Anglo-French intervention. The Russians did not, and so both Britain and France declared war. So Russia did have a gargantuan army, but its numbers were limited by the system of serfdom, since the serfs were needed to work and the nobles didn't want to give them rifles. By
Yeah. Typically, you don't want to give them guns. No.
Mid-1854, the Russians had withdrawn from the Danubian principalities, which the Austrians then occupied. The main assault against the Russians began in September of 1854 with the Allies landing in Crimea. They pushed to the south, looking to capture the important fortress of Sevastopol. The Russians chose to meet them here at the Battle of Alma, whereby they were pushed back by the British and French forces. One of the reasons for the Russian loss was that Allied troops had been issued with the new rifled muskets, which had greater range and accuracy than those of the Russians. After their victory at Alma, the Allies moved south and encircled Sevastopol. The British suffered from issues of professionalism during the Crimean campaign. Their officers weren't selected
Daddy made me an officer.
on merit, and the soldiers were forced to consume awful rations. The horrendous conditions saw the spread of disease, mostly cholera, which killed far more soldiers than combat did.
Wait, hold on. What did
The
that
horrendous
say?
conditions saw the spread of disease, mostly cholera, which killed far more
Visualization of disease.
soldiers than combat did. One nurse, Florence Nightingale, was instrumental in reforming the medical practices in the military and made many demands for improvements. Anywho, the Russians didn't simply sit there and let the Allies besiege Sevastopol. They launched multiple attacks against the Allied positions, the most famous being their attempt to recapture Balaclava in order to break the siege. This battle saw the famous charge of the Light Brigade, a complete slaughter of the British cavalry. So 1855 was a big year for the war. Sardinia joined on the Allied side and said
Let's go, Sardinia.
many thousands of troops to aid them. This was mostly so it could discuss Italian unification with Britain and France in a good light. 2. The British and French began naval assaults in the Baltic Sea to disrupt shipping and hurt Russian trade, but also to prevent the movement of troops south to Crimea. And 3. Nicholas I of Russia died and was succeeded by Alexander II, who sought to continue the war until victory. This led to the Russians attempting several more times to relieve Sevastopol, including an attempted invasion of the Ottoman Empire via the Caucasus. All of their attempts failed, and in September
Man, has the Russian military ever been competent? Like, the only time period I feel like you can really argue that they were competent was World War II. And shortly after World War II, but then like post-1960, no. I feel like, oof.
of 1855, Sevastopol fell, mostly to a French assault. The Crimean War was now lost for the Russians, and they agreed to a peace treaty in early 1856. The conditions were that 1. All sides would give back any occupied territory, except for Russia, who would lose a tiny bit of territory here. 2. Russia would no longer be the protector of Christians within the Ottoman Empire, and 3. The Black Sea was to remain demilitarized. For the Russians, the war was a complete humiliation, and it became clear that major reforms were needed. For the Ottomans, the war brought back some of its prestige and was a stopgap in its decline. For the British, the war, whilst a victory, was embarrassing. For the French, the war was truly a victory in all spheres. They'd won back a great deal of prestige, and they demonstrated that their army was once again the greatest in Europe. After which France and Napoleon III would ride a high forevermore, and absolutely nothing or no one whatsoever could ruin it. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching, and a special thanks to James Bisonet.
Alright, that was the Crimean War, a short animated documentary. You know what? They covered this pretty well. I think, I do think they could have actually squeezed in more about the wider politics of this war. I think that would have been pretty interesting to hear about, kind of get a little bit more thoughts on, well, the tensions between the Ottomans and the Russians, and then a little bit more, or maybe just a little bit more on why the British and French really don't want the Russians to gain a lot of land. They just made a brief mention like Russia's already big, don't want them to get bigger, which yeah, fair enough, but also like a little bit more reason maybe. I don't know. I also would have, or aside from that, I would have loved to actually hear more internal politicking from the Ottoman side and the Russian side. Hear like maybe what was the internal nobility's thoughts or whatever on the Russians. What were the Sultan's advisors saying or whatever the fuck. That would have been neat. But this was a good video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.